It's a joke. Half-Life Alyx VR only.
VR is
Pathetic.
awful. Dizzying,
I think Half-Life
confusing,
games on
and
PC
extremely
PSVR
overhyped.
2's
VR is
$550
extreme
price
for
is already
many who
high.
seek to
After
break
such
down
a
the
long
walls.
I'm sick of this. I feel like every time that VR is brought up in any way, whether it be a new game release or someone just enjoying it, these exact same talking points come up every single time. You have almost certainly heard these before and may have even brought them up yourself. Well, in this video I'm going to be talking about them and epically destroying them. Before getting into them properly, I think it's worth mentioning that these aren't without merit. And honestly, most of them could fall into the category of being true maybe 6 years ago, but massively outdated now. This sucks, because there are actual valid concerns and issues that I think are so much more important than these talking points related to VR, and more importantly, the VR industry. I have been absolutely in love with VR for years, but was constantly terrified of getting into it because of these very same talking points. But when I finally bought my first headset, a year or so ago, from a friend at work, I was shocked at the fact that not only were the vast majority of these issues people have with VR not to be true, but I was absolutely shocked at the fact that the real issues are so obvious. So, without further ado, let's get into the most common arguments before getting into the real issues I have with VR. It's too expensive. No, it ain't. I understand everyone's currency is different. I may be struggling, but I still live in the UK. The average disposable income here for an entire household is about £1,888 per month. Obviously, this is an average, so in all likelihood, most households are dealing with far less than that. But I digress. For that much, you would be easily able to afford a Quest 2 or even an Index in a month. More likely 2 or 3, considering the actual state of things. I understand that these are expensive, but for technology, that's actually quite reasonable. Especially for what you're getting until you take into account that in no way are other people this fortunate. Going to the extreme, Burundi, which according to this is the lowest GDP. The average disposable income is about £164 per month. That will be all of your spending power in a month just for a Quest 2. And remember, due to how these averages work, the real amount most people have is much lower. That's understandably a lot for the bare minimum. It'll take 3 months to be able to just afford a PS5 without spending it on anything else. What's our point of comparison? This isn't a new keyboard, this is in all intents and purposes a new console. I'm serious. In my opinion, the modern day, this is the only console that actually has a difference to just PC gaming. Consoles since the PS2 era have stopped providing hardware that you can't just achieve or surpass with PC hardware. Consoles since then have just been PCs, sold at a loss. You can have personal preference for consoles, but genuinely, there is no reason outside of exclusives that you can only achieve an experience with a console. Before the PS2 era, this made sense. Most hardware innovations for consumers came from the console generations, which in themselves came from the arcade machine industry. I think genuinely VR is the only valid reason for an exclusive in my eyes, because that experience literally cannot be achieved on a flat screen. This is something you can only get thanks to how virtual reality headsets in themselves work. This isn't without a modicum of truth, which I will get into later in the actual concerns, but actual expense concerns? Yeah, no. If anything, good VR has only lowered the barrier to entry even without a PC every single year. On that note, this video is sponsored by me. Give me your money. Not everyone has the space. Sit down. Genuinely probably the most quickest and simplest segment in this entire video. I keep hearing this as a gotcha, but like, just sit down? Seriously, seated VR just needs space for your arms to move. This is the space I have for standing VR. And it's enough. Is it the same experience for seated VR as standing VR? No, not really, but with OVR Toolkit, you can express some things you can do with just general standard VR. Also, why does VR suddenly become terrible if it's not the best possible experience? Why does everything have to be all or nothing? Why can't there be a budget option for VR? PC gaming doesn't suddenly become impossible just because you have a £200 budget. Get an old Optiplex, plug in a GPU, and wow, now you can play a bunch of games at low settings. Sure, but doesn't mean it's useless. Why is this suddenly the case with VR? anything is better than nothing. There aren't no games. But there are. There are over 6,000 games supporting VR on Steam alone. Like, 6 or 7 years ago, sure, this was kind of true. There were only like 1,000 games. But come on, it's not 2017. We aren't dealing with just shitty tech demos anymore. There's so many VR experiences. I could understand that there's a lot of VR shooters. There's still a lot of other VR genres. There's RPGs, there are MMOs, there are tabletop games, there are rhythm games, and there are so many genres. Are there as many games in those genres as shooters? No, but they are still there. And if you really want more, saying VR is a lost cause is just going to cause the exact opposite effect that you want. Also, God, I just realized how many VR adult games there are on Steam. Not diss, you do you, but damn, that's a lot. If the quality of VR games are the issue, then we'll move on to the next segment. It's only tech demos. Maybe 6 years ago, but not anymore. I think stuff like this comes from the official tie-in games coming in during the early stages of VR. And instead of trying to innovate what we had, they just made Iron Man The Experience or Arkham VR, which are both just glorified tech demos. At least Arkham VR has a pretty alright story. After the high-profile release of Half-Life Alyx, this entire argument should have gone the way of the dodo, but for those games, it just didn't. And I don't understand why. I think genuinely people just had terrible experiences 6 years ago with these tech demos and just gave up entirely. And when Half-Life Alyx came out, or hell, even Boneworks before that, people just saw it as another shitty tech demo gatekept by this super expensive thing that they thought was expensive. It sucks, but that's how impressions work. With that being said, I would like to talk about the real issues with VR. The annoying thing about all of these arguments is that there's always a bit of a modicum of truth. The price is the perfect example. The price is cheap if you want to sell your soul to Meta. That's right. My entire issues with the VR and the VR industry is with Meta or Facebook or Oculus or whatever the fuck. They have a market dominance on cheap VR headset and standalone VR, and this needs to stop. Facebook is a terrible company for reasons I don't think I need to even state. Hell, for this, I will use myself for an example. I got this Oculus Rift OS off of a friend from work as my first and currently only VR headset. Enthusiasm turned into grim realization that I can't use it on my PC. To be able to use the Rift S, you need to install the Oculus application, which monitors your headset, communicates to Facebook constantly, and has its own marketplace. This is the only way to get the headset's drivers officially. I cannot use this application, as Oculus did not make this application available on Linux, only Windows. Why do I use Linux? A variety of reasons. Why did Meta not make the Oculus application available on Linux? We don't really know. If I had to hazard a guess, the application being closed source and invasive would make it not available in any actual Linux package store, and for that reason it probably wouldn't be worth developing the application for Linux for the, at the time, super low market share of Linux users. Alright, whatever I guess. I'm going to install Windows and dual boot on my machine for the first time in years. After a bunch of troubleshooting my VR headset, not getting the power it needs and a faulty cable, I finally have it working. And I need a Facebook account to use my device? What the fuck? In what non-dystopian world is having to make a social media account to be able to use your hardware at all a good idea? This is a huge breach of privacy and the open source philosophy. Alright, I made a thorough count, and now I can finally use Steam VR with the Oculus app, constantly eating resources, monitoring everything I do. And also, I need to dual boot anytime I need to use VR just for VR, and that's it. That's the only way I can ever play VR. Yeah, no, okay, I uninstalled it, and I haven't played VR much since because, oh my god, fuck that. This is the experience for most people using standalone VR. If not worse. We need a competitor for the low-end market, and we need to show that this is not okay on any level. And those are my real issues with VR.